I'm Emily, 32, the youngest daughter they never really counted. A part of me still hoped for one day, just one I wouldn't be invisible. But nothing changed. I was just a guest at my own parents' table. At my sister's engagement party, they made sure there was no seat for me. Then someone stood up, and the room was never the same. The day I got the letter, the air felt heavier than usual. It was early autumn, one of those crisp mornings where the leaves crunched under your shoes and everything smelled faintly of apples and dry wood. The envelope sat alone on my kitchen table, the handwriting instantly recognizable, my father's. Not a call, not a visit, just 10 words in black ink, will reading. October 14th, 10 a.m. You may attend. You may. Not please come, not we'd like you there. Just permission. Cold. Conditional. I stared at the envelope for a while, my coffee turning lukewarm. It had been nearly 2 years since I last saw any of them. Not since Rachel's wedding, the one I wasn't invited to, or more precisely the one I was told not to come to because it would be simpler that way. That phrase still echoed sometimes. Simpler, as if my presence complicated their perfection. I pulled the blinds halfway. The morning sun slanted across the table, highlighting dust on the wood. In my apartment, everything was modest, worn edges, second-hand mugs, books stacked 2 rows deep. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. Quiet, honest. I thought back to that summer, Rachel in her custom Vera Wang dress, the entire family posing by the lake. My name wasn't mentioned. I wasn't tagged in the photos. Mom had sent me a text later that said, "Hope you're doing well." That was it. So I sent a single reply to the letter. Understood. I'll be there. And then I pulled a photo from the back of my desk drawer, the one they had never seen. That week I didn't speak much about the letter. At work, I filed reports and answered emails like always. But something sat quietly beneath the surface, not anger, not sadness exactly. Just a weight, a presence, like standing outside a house you used to live in, watching others move around inside. I hadn't been part of the family for years. Not since I chose a different path. Not since I said no to law school and yes to photography. Not since I moved out and stopped asking for help. They called it rebellion. I called it survival. On the morning of the reading, I chose a charcoal gray blazer. Clean lines, soft wool. Not flashy. My hair was tied in a low bun. Minimal makeup. Just the right amount to make it clear I came out of respect, not desperation. The old estate was 30 miles out of town, tucked behind sycamore trees and iron gates. I hadn't been there since I was 23. The gravel crunched under my boots as I stepped out of the car. Rachel's Tesla gleamed in the driveway, Mom's silver Audi beside it. As I walked up the stone steps, I noticed the curtains shift. Someone had seen me arrive. Inside it smelled like lemon polish and aging books. Mr. Alden greeted me first, warm as always. "Emily, it's good to see you." I nodded. Likewise. In the study, they were already seated. Rachel looked up, surprised for a moment, then smiled like it meant nothing. Like this wasn't the first time she'd seen me in years. Mom kept her eyes on her gloves. Dad adjusted his cufflinks as if time would move faster if he didn't look at me. I took the seat farthest from the fireplace. "I didn't think you'd come," Rachel said. Her tone wasn't cruel, just amused. "I was invited," I replied and smiled. Mr. Alden cleared his throat. The reading was about to begin. But before he opened the folder, Rachel leaned slightly and murmured loud enough for the room to catch, "You didn't even come to the wedding." Her voice was velvet-coated steel. Her eyes sparkled. I didn't answer. I simply reached into my bag, pulled out a small envelope, and slid the photo across the table, face down toward Mr. Alden. A ripple of tension passed. No one spoke. Even Mr. Alden raised an eyebrow. But I just crossed my legs calmly and looked toward the window. Outside, a crow landed on the iron fence, black against gray sky, silent. Inside, I waited, because I knew that photo, when flipped, would say everything I didn't. Mr. Alden didn't reach for the envelope immediately. He just looked at it, a simple photo-sized rectangle sitting still between us. It seemed small, almost forgettable, but it had weight, like something ticking beneath the surface. Rachel's smirk didn't fully fade, but her fingers curled slightly against the armrest. Her wedding band platinum with a cushion-cut diamond caught the light as she fidgeted. She glanced at our mother. Nothing was said, but something passed between them. A flicker of nerves, maybe. Or annoyance. "I believe we can begin," Mr. Alden finally said. He didn't touch the photo. He opened the folder instead, his voice steady and clear, listing the formalities first. The will's date, its authentication, the name of the estate. I only half listened. My focus was on the way Dad tapped his ring against the wood table. Slow, repetitive. 3 beats, then a pause. He always did that when he was uncomfortable. And per the wishes of the deceased, Mr. Alden continued, "The following individuals are named as beneficiaries." Rachel sat up straighter. "Margaret Sinclair," he said, turning to my mother, "is named as sole custodian of the lake house until such a time it is sold." Mom nodded nonchalant, as if that was expected. "Richard Sinclair," he went on, "is named as trustee of the family's investment portfolio contingent upon quarterly reporting to the board." Dad's jaw moved, slightly grinding teeth behind polite silence. "And Rachel Sinclair, Mr. Alden said, is named as recipient of the art collection and the antique vehicles stored at the estate's south garage." Rachel let out a breath, quiet but satisfied. She crossed her legs in that signature way, ankle over knee, like she owned the room. And then Mr. Alden paused. He looked at me. "And Emily," he said for the first time, "my name spoken aloud in this house is named as the sole inheritor of the personal trust established by Harold Sinclair, which includes all liquid assets, future disbursements, and intellectual properties in his name." The room went still. No one moved. The only sound was the whisper of wind pressing against the old windows. Rachel blinked. "What trust?" she asked, eyes narrowing. "There wasn't a dad, you said." Mr. Alden raised a hand gently. "The trust was created privately in 2019. Harold gave explicit instruction that it remain sealed until his passing." Mom shifted in her seat, mouth pressed tight. Her gloved hands were clasped now, fingers interlocked too tightly to be casual. I didn't say a word. Rachel turned sharply to me. "You didn't even visit him," she snapped. "You weren't at the hospital, you didn't even come to the wedding." There it was. Again. That line. That knife. I met her gaze, still calm, still composed. Mr. Alden picked up the envelope finally and slid the photo out. His brows furrowed as he studied it, and then something in his face softened. He turned it around and placed it on the table for all to see. In the photograph, Grandpa Harold sat in a small garden behind the rehab center wearing a wool cardigan and holding a paper flower, one of mine. I was next to him, hand on his shoulder, both of us smiling faintly. A date was written in the corner, October 3rd, 2022, 2 weeks before he passed. No one spoke, because now they couldn't. My voice wasn't needed. The photo had already told them I was there, quietly. Without cameras, without announcements. I hadn't stayed away. I'd simply never needed them to see me while I was doing the right thing. Mom looked at the photo, then at me. Her mouth opened slightly, but she said nothing. Dad's ring tapping had stopped. Rachel leaned back, her expression confusion wrapped in disbelief. Like the story she had written, the version of me she'd carried all this time no longer made sense. Mr. Alden continued the reading, but it was background noise now. Something had shifted, not loudly, not with shouting or slamming doors, but like a door quietly closing behind me and locking from my side. I sat there, legs crossed, hands folded, as the remainder of the will was read. The estate divided, the instructions outlined. Outside, the wind had picked up. Leaves scraped across the window pane. I noticed Rachel hadn't touched the glass of water in front of her. I hadn't touched mine either. When it was over, Mr. Alden stood. "If you have questions, I'll be in my office." Everyone stayed seated. The room felt heavier now, not with grief, but with awareness, like they were seeing me for the first time and unsure what exactly they were seeing. I stood. I didn't look at Rachel. I didn't wait for words from my parents. I just nodded once softly toward Mr. Alden, and I walked out. But before the door closed, I heard Dad whisper, barely audible, "She never told us." No one replied, because there was nothing left to say. I didn't go home after the will reading. Instead, I drove to the small overlook near the edge of the city, a quiet spot Grandpa used to take me to when I was a child. Back then, we'd sit on the hood of his old Lincoln, passing a thermos of tea between us, staring out at the blinking skyline like it held answers. The wind had picked up. I sat on the bench and pulled my coat tighter, letting the silence stretch. I didn't feel triumphant. Just still. Because the truth wasn't about who inherited what. It was about what they didn't see all those years they'd decided I was absent, disconnected, disposable. But I had always been there, in different ways, quiet ways. Rachel had the spotlight, always did. The weddings, the family dinners, the social posts with captioned smiles. I never fought her for it. I never needed to. Because some things matter more when they're not displayed. I thought of Grandpa's voice. The last time I saw him, he held my hand and said, "You don't need to prove anything, not to them. Just keep showing up even when they don't." The photo was proof, but more than that, it was mine. I'd never planned to show it, but when they threw that line again, tried to shrink me to a memory they could control, it was the right time. Back at the house, I knew what was happening. Rachel would be pacing, Mom trying to rewrite the narrative before it spread to their friends. Dad silent, maybe wondering how he missed it, but I didn't need to be there for any of that. I'd done what I came to do, not for revenge, not even for recognition, just to be whole. To take my seat not in their version of the family, but in mine. A car pulled into the overlook parking. I didn't turn. Only when the footsteps approached did I glance over my shoulder. It was Mr. Alden. He didn't sit, just stood beside the bench, hands in his coat pockets. "I knew about the visit," he said quietly. "Harold made me promise to keep it between us." I nodded. "He wanted them to figure it out on their own," Mr. Alden added. "Guess today." They finally did. We stood in silence a while longer. The city lights below flickered like distant stars. Before he left, he said one more thing. "He chose you because you didn't need the stage, but somehow when you stood up, they all stopped talking." I didn't reply. Because sometimes that's the point. You don't raise your voice. You let the silence do it for you. The invitation to Rachel's wedding came late. It arrived not by call, not even by email, but as a printed envelope slid into my mailbox 2 weeks before the date. No return address, just my name misspelled slightly. Inside was a thick ivory card embossed and gleaming, the kind you'd expect for a royal affair. Rachel always did have a taste for grandeur, and at the bottom in fine print was a note: "Reception, immediate family table reserved. Please consult usher for alternative seating." Alternative seating. It said everything without saying anything. Still, I ironed my dress, booked the cheapest flight I could find, and packed lightly. I didn't RSVP. I didn't think they'd notice either way. The night before the wedding, I stayed at a small inn near the venue. No one from the family reached out, not even to confirm if I was coming. The morning of, I walked into the ballroom early. Staff buzzed around in black and white uniforms. Flowers, candles, glinting crystal. It was a scene pulled straight from a bridal magazine. I found my seat in the very back corner behind a floral arrangement large enough to obscure half the ceremony. I didn't complain. I sat. I waited. As guests trickled in, I watched familiar faces pass by me without pause. My cousins, old friends of the family, former neighbors. No one looked twice. Then came my parents. Margaret's dress shimmered. Richard looked stiff in his tux, uncomfortable but proud. They took their place beside Rachel at the front, adjusting corsages, smiling for photos. Rachel turned to whisper something to Mom, and they both looked toward the back, toward me, and laughed. I stayed seated. During the ceremony, I watched the moments pass like pages in a glossy brochure: vows, tears, applause. When the groom kissed Rachel, the room erupted. I clapped too, 2 quiet, careful claps. At the reception, I lingered by the back wall, watching guests swirl into pairs, music rising, glasses clinking. Mr. Alden was there. He spotted me, gave a subtle nod, and walked on. I didn't eat. I wasn't hungry. Midway through dinner, Margaret walked by. She glanced at me, paused, and then leaned in just slightly. "You didn't have to come, you know," she said, adjusting her shawl. "But I suppose it's nice you made the effort." I nodded. She didn't wait for a reply. Later that night outside the ballroom, I overheard Rachel talking with some of her friends. She only came to be seen. Classic Emily, always showing up just enough to make it about her. The girls laughed. One of them said something about the black sheep corner. More laughter. I slipped outside. The garden was quiet. I leaned against the railing, staring at the string lights overhead. My phone buzzed. A photo from Mr. Alden. It was of Grandpa seated in his armchair holding a worn leather photo album. Below the image was a caption, "He kept this near him till the end." I knew which photo it was, the one I'd taken that day months before the wedding when I'd visited him unannounced. No fanfare, just us. And the tea. That's when I made the decision. I wouldn't show the photo. Not yet, not as a weapon, but maybe one day as a mirror. For now, I'd remain the blurry figure in the corner, not erased, just watching. A few days after the wedding, I returned to my apartment, a modest space filled with more books than furniture. It felt colder than usual. Maybe it was just me. I unpacked slowly. My shoes still carried dust from the ballroom's garden path. I placed the ivory invitation back in its envelope, tucking it behind a stack of unpaid utility bills. Life resumed, or at least pretended to. Rachel's wedding photos began to circulate online, perfectly lit, beautifully posed. I wasn't in a single one, not even the blurry background of a group shot. One day an email arrived from Margaret. Short, formal. "Emily, we're reading Grandpa's will next Thursday. Your presence is requested but optional. Best Mom. Optional." As if my role in that room would be decorative at best. Still, I replied, "I'll be there." The meeting was to be held at Alden and Grace Law Offices, a beige stone building with tall windows that always felt slightly too clean. On the day I arrived 10 minutes early. The receptionist looked surprised to see me. "They're already inside," she said, gesturing toward the conference room. When I stepped in, they barely looked up. Rachel sat beside Mom, legs crossed, scrolling through her phone. Dad sipped coffee, flipping through a manila folder. Mr. Alden stood by the far end of the table, placing small envelopes beside each name card. There was no seat assigned for me. I remained standing. Mr. Alden nodded politely. "We'll begin in just a moment." Rachel finally looked up. "Oh, you came," she said. "Not a greeting, more like a comment on the weather." Mom smiled tight and brief. "It's nice you made time." I said nothing. Mr. Alden cleared his throat and began. "This won't take long. Your grandfather made a few last-minute changes, which I'll read aloud now." Rachel leaned forward, eyes gleaming. The will started predictably mentions of donations, a note about the house, something about a painting collection. Then came the line, "To my granddaughter Rachel, who has always known how to be seen, I leave the family pearls and the cabin in Vermont." Rachel beamed. "To my daughter Margaret, who maintained the holidays, the lake house and its contents." Mom nodded solemnly. "To my son-in-law Richard, my gold watch, and my gratitude for staying married." A small laugh escaped Dad. Rachel joined in. "And to Emily." Mr. Alden paused. Rachel tilted her head. "Wait. She gets something." Mr. Alden ignored the interruption. "To Emily, who understood that presence isn't measured by proximity, but by sincerity, I leave my journals and the photo." Silence fell. Rachel blinked. "What photo?" Mr. Alden looked at me. "You have it, don't you?" I reached into my bag. From a side pocket, I pulled out a small, worn photograph. Grandpa sitting in his chair holding my hand, his eyes crinkled in that half laugh he always gave when pretending to be serious. I slid the photo across the table. No words, just the sound of paper on polished wood. Rachel picked it up. Her fingers trembled slightly. "This was taken," when Mr. Alden answered, 2 months ago, the day after he changed the will." Margaret looked at me, her face unreadable. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. They had counted on absence, but he had seen differently. And now, so did they. Rachel placed the photo face down like it stung her fingers. No one spoke for a moment. The room, so full of self-assured laughter minutes before, now felt brittle. I didn't know he saw you, Rachel said, voice quieter. Not apologetic, just surprised. I didn't answer. I only watched Mr. Alden continue with the formalities. The journals will be delivered to Emily within the week, he said. They're annotated. Your grandfather was meticulous. Mom cleared her throat. He didn't mention anything about this. To us. Mr. Alden gave a polite nod. He didn't mention a lot, Margaret. Some choices are made in silence. Rachel frowned. But she wasn't even at the wedding. Grandpa knew that. Now I looked at her. I was with him the weekend before. He wasn't strong enough to travel, remember? Rachel blinked. He asked me to stay instead, said the wedding would go on with or without him, but he didn't want to spend another Sunday alone. No one moved. I brought him soup. We played cards. He told me the story behind that old photo by the fireplace, the one with the fishing boat. He asked about my job. He even made me promise not to cry when he was gone. Dad rubbed his temple. He never told us. I nodded slightly. That was the point. Mr. Alden cleared his throat. Unless there are objections were concluded. Margaret stood. Of course not. Rachel stood slower, her face still unreadable. She left the photo on the table. I waited until everyone else exited. Then I walked over, picked up the picture, and slipped it back into my coat pocket. Mr. Alden lingered. He knew they'd try to minimize you. I smiled faintly. He always did. He extended his hand. He was proud, Emily. Not just of what you did, but how you carried yourself. That sentence stayed with me long after I left the office. Outside, the wind had picked up. Leaves swirled across the sidewalk in tight little spirals. I walked slowly, not toward a cab, but toward the park a few blocks away. On the bench where Grandpa and I once sat, I unfolded the photo again. His eyes still crinkled in that same quiet mischief. They had measured me by the events I didn't attend, but he had measured me by the time I chose to give, and maybe for once that was enough. 2 days after the will reading, an invitation appeared in my mailbox. It wasn't hand-delivered. No embossed gold seal. Just a plain white envelope slid beneath other letters and store flyers. The handwriting on it wasn't Rachel's or Mom's. It was printed. Cold. Formal. A family brunch. At the house. To reflect and reconnect. I almost didn't go. But then I remembered the bench, the wind and Grandpa's voice. Sometimes silence isn't absence. It's presence on your terms. So I dressed simply. Gray wool coat. No jewelry. Hair down. As I approached the house, I saw Mom's car in the driveway. Rachel's parked beside it. The hedges had been trimmed. Porch light still flickered from a loose bulb. Some things never changed. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and lemon polish. Rachel looked up from arranging silverware. You came, she said like it was a surprise. Her tone neutral. Practiced. I did. Mom emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. We thought it would be good. To sit. To talk. Dad sat silently at the table, already flipping through an old photo album. No one mentioned the will. We ate in near silence. Occasional clinks of cutlery. A few murmured words about weather grocery prices. Then Rachel spoke. Did you know about the journals? Before I looked up. Her eyes weren't accusatory, just searching. I did, I said. He told me. A pause. Why didn't you say anything? Because he asked me not to. That landed. I watched it settle across her face like realization does when pride has finally thinned. He always said you listened better than the rest of us, Rachel said after a beat. I thought he just meant you were quiet. Mom reached for her cup, but missed the handle. Her fingers trembled slightly. I found one of his notes in the guest room, she said. Tucked behind the lamp. He'd written your name on the corner. I didn't reply. Just lowered my gaze. I guess, she continued, voice softer now. He wanted you to find it. Dad cleared his throat. It said something about, time given freely is love without ego. I didn't quite understand it then. I did. The room held that kind of silence, not empty, not awkward, but full of what hadn't been said for years. Mr. Alden's words came back. Some choices are made in silence, and some recognitions come not in applause but in quiet acknowledgments over coffee and crumbs. Rachel Rose left the table and returned with something wrapped in soft cloth. "I think this is yours," she said, placing it in front of me. "He wanted to pass it down, but we didn't know." I unwrapped the cloth. It was Grandpa's old watch, the one he only wore on Sundays. Its hands had stopped at 10:17. I didn't wind it, just held it gently. In that moment, no one apologized, no grand gestures, no teary speeches. But when Rachel stood to clear the plates, she paused and looked at me. "You should sit with us next time." And for the first time in years, I felt the chair beneath me wasn't borrowed. The house felt different that day. Not warmer, not necessarily more welcoming, but less sharp, less brittle. I stayed seated long after the plates were cleared. Dad busied himself stacking dishes, Rachel filled the sink with water, and Mom lingered near the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, like she couldn't decide whether to leave or come back. I traced the worn leather strap of Grandpa's watch in my palm. He never explained the time it always stopped at 10:17. He used to say that was the minute I realized silence can say more than 1,000 words. I never knew what he meant. Until now. Rachel came back and sat across from me, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. She didn't speak for a moment, just watched me. And then she said something I didn't expect. "I thought you resented me?" I blinked. For what? Forgetting everything. For being the one they paraded around. She gave a small, sad smile. "I used to think you didn't try hard enough to be included, but now I realize maybe we didn't try at all to include you." The sentence hung there like fog, and I let it sit. I wasn't going to fill the space for her. Mom returned with a stack of old mail. "These came after the funeral," she said, handing them to me. I didn't open them. Among the envelopes, one was different, older. The handwriting was shaky, the ink slightly smudged. It was from Grandpa, postmarked 2 weeks before he passed. I opened it. "Emily?" The letter began, "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and likely they're sitting around a table deciding what I meant and what I didn't." I paused and looked up. No one interrupted. "But you know. You always knew. This family doesn't run on inheritance. It runs on who shows up when no one else does." I swallowed hard. "I chose you not because you were louder, flashier, or more successful. I chose you because you stayed even when they told you not to." My hand trembled slightly as I folded the letter back. Rachel leaned forward. "What did he say?" I looked at her. "He said he chose me because I showed up, when no one else did." There was no gloating in my voice, no triumph. Just a quiet truth finally said aloud. Mom sat down slowly across from me. "I didn't know you visited him so often. You never asked." That wasn't meant to wound. It was just the truth. Dad sighed. "We should have done better." No one argued. For a long moment, there was only the soft gurgle of the sink and the distant creak of the house settling. Then Rachel broke the silence again. "You know, at the wedding, I told the photographer not to include any empty chairs in the family photo. I didn't want reminders." She looked at me, a flicker of guilt crossing her face, but somehow, even without a photo, the emptiness was louder. Her eyes didn't leave mine. "I saw your picture in the envelope," she added. "The one you slid across the table. You were in Grandpa's garden, holding his hand." "Last spring," I said quietly. "He asked me to take it with him." She nodded. "That photo made me feel small." "You weren't supposed to feel small," I replied. "Just aware." Another silence. But this one was gentler. Outside, the wind picked up. The chimes on the back porch clinked softly. No one rushed to speak again. The room wasn't healed, but it had opened a door that had been shut for too long. And sometimes that's more than enough. The hours that followed felt like the slow untying of a knot that had lived in my chest for years. Nobody offered an apology, not directly. But maybe that wasn't the point. I didn't come for an apology. That evening, I helped Rachel dry the dishes. Our movements were clumsy at first, two people relearning how to be near each other without sharp edges. But by the time we reached the last plate, something had softened. "I don't know how to fix this," she said, not looking up. "You don't have to," I replied, handing her a towel. "Just don't pretend it was never broken." She paused, then gave a slow nod. Later, as I gathered my things, Mom stopped me by the door. "There's something I want you to have," she said, disappearing into the hallway. She returned with a small wooden box I recognized immediately, Grandpa's cufflink case. "I didn't realize he left this," I said. "He didn't. But I think he would have wanted you to choose what to do with it." Inside were not cufflinks, but a few of Grandpa's handwritten notes, a faded photo of him holding me as a baby, and a pressed flower from the garden we used to tend together. "I didn't know he kept all this." Mom's voice was quiet. "He didn't keep it for us to find. He kept it for you." I carried the box out with me, not saying much more. Outside, the night had settled fully. I stood by my car for a while, not quite ready to leave. That's when Mr. Alden walked up. I hadn't seen him since the reading. "I figured I'd catch you here," he said. "You okay?" I nodded. "You know," he added, "when your grandfather rewrote his will, he told me, they'll think I changed it out of spite. But really, I'm just giving Emily what the others refused to see she already had." What was that steadiness? And roots? I didn't respond. I just let the wind answer for me. He reached into his coat and handed me one last envelope. "He asked me to give you this only after today." I took it and waited until I got into the car to open it. Inside was a single sentence written in Grandpa's unsteady scrawl: "Keep planting, even if they don't see the garden." I closed my eyes. In that moment, I didn't need validation. I didn't need an audience. I had my peace. At home, I framed the photo of us in the garden, the same one I'd slid across the table. Not as a trophy, not as a statement, but as a reminder. Some things bloom quietly. Some things speak without sound, and some things like truth, like love, don't need permission to take root. I never went back to that house for another dinner, not because I was angry, but because sometimes closing a door doesn't mean slamming it. It just means you're done waiting for someone else to open it. She never raised her voice. She never begged to be seen. But when the moment came, they looked, and they couldn't look away, because some silences aren't empty, they're earned. And in that stillness, everything changed.